I'm John Van Auken, and this is one lesson in a series of lessons based on the Edgar Cayce material. Today we're going to focus on the concept of entering the temple within. It would help us if we understood a little bit more about the temple and the concept of a temple. And I'd like to start with some drawings I've put on the board here. One of the oldest temple concepts on the earth are those that we find in Giza on the plateau there, the pyramids. A full pyramid temple consisted of a valley temple where initial ceremonies would be done, and usually the people would be coming up from the Nile and entering here. Ceremonies would occur at this level, and then there would be a procession all the way up this causeway, and certain functions would occur along the causeway as you moved up. You would then move into another temple right up here at the side of the Great Pyramid, and eventually on into the pyramid. These temples were used for initiation, enlightenment, honoring God, celebration of the spirit and the life force, even trying to evoke the spirit and the life force into material life. I know some people feel that the pyramids are just tombs, but there's more and more evidence now that that's not the case, that they were used for more than just a tomb concept. If you look at the side of this section of the pyramid temple complex, you'll notice that in the Great Pyramid there are 3 chambers. I just want you to keep that in mind, because as we look at other temples that have come along later, the 3-chamber concept has stayed in the architectural layout. You have here, if the temples are called the Pit, the Queen's Chamber, and the King's Chamber, but actually if you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the names are the Chamber of Upside Downness, the Chamber of Rebirth, and the Chamber of the Empty Tomb. As you know, in Western theological history, Moses is called out of Egypt by God and led to discover a new temple. And he's drawn out of the lush and the pleasure and the beauty of Egypt and out of his bondage to it, his people's bondage, out into the desert to where he meets God and develops a new temple. Part of the transition coming to this desert temple concept is that the whole of the tribe of Israel comes with him, and God designs this temple for Moses, and it's portable. Unlike this stone temple, this temple moves with you. And I think there's something to be realized in there. I think that's a hint that this temple is portable and moves with you. It's made out of curtains and poles. It has a general outer court area, one section of it. The second section is the inner place called the Holy Place. And then there's a third section, the Holy of Holies. The idea was that you would begin your ceremony by entering this area, and on this altar you would sacrifice something of your material consciousness that you desired. The apple of your eye in the material world, you would give that up as an offering. You would cleanse and bathe things in this pool, and that would then lead you into a deeper level of consciousness, similar to this process of beginning out here, offering certain things, and then moving to another level. In here was the bread of the presence of God, and certain ceremonies would occur, and you would take another level of leaving the earthly desires and interests behind and moving closer to the spiritual contact with God. Then God promised Moses and the others that if they entered into the final Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, that they actually could meet God directly. They would have a direct experience with God, and then they would go out and share it with the people. The Ark of the Covenant was an interesting arrangement here for the deeper contact, in that it was a box, basically, in gold and acacia wood. And it had on top of it the mercy seat and the cherubim with their wings in a submissive position. Inside was the covenant between God and man, or the Ten Commandments, and the rod that budded, Aaron's high priest rod that budded, which I'll explain a little more as we get further along here. But they were heavy symbols of deep teachings about entering direct contact with the Creator. At this point, the high priest would make contact and have the experience and consciously feel the message from God, and would be able to convey the people's needs to God, and then would come back and bring it to the congregation. In a modern church, these principles still carry over somewhat. We have a outer receiving area where the people come in, and usually this is the greeting area. We have these pews and an aisle down the middle. They almost look like rib cages here. And then you have your first altar, which normally is facing the people, and the people bring their offerings to this altar. But then you have a second altar usually in the back of the church with the tabernacle on it. And in the Christian arrangement, this would have the body and blood of Christ in that tabernacle. Again, as you can see, the three areas, a sequence of transitions from outer self, outer life, material life, to the deeper self, and eventually into direct contact with God. All of this was intended to maintain a concept that there is a temple in which God would actually meet us directly. And the ultimate teaching, as you see in St. Paul's epistles, is that that temple is within us. Actually, the real temple is the body, and that the body is the temple of the living God. And the body follows similar patterns to the external temples that we have had in ancient times, and those that carry over to modern times. Basically, using some references to the past and some of Cayce's teachings, the lower area is the first section of the temple, then there's a second section here, and then there's the third section. And you can also divide this into two levels, but let's use the three following the pattern. Normally in a human body you have an abdominal cavity. It's an open place in the abdomen with the lower muscle area as the bottom and the diaphragm as the top. Then you have another cavity up in this area called the pulmonary cavity. And then eventually you have the cranial cavity, or cavities because of all the other little cavities in there. So you do have three distinct places in the human body, as well as you did in the ancient temples. The process, once again, was to move from outer energies further and further in toward the deeper self, and eventually into direct contact with God. Now you'll notice the pattern I'm drawing here that Edgar Cayce used is not the only one you'll see these days. And that's because some of the yogis in their experiences started to have such profound sensations in their crown chakra, or their head area here, the spiritual center of the crown of the head, that they will actually draw the pathway inside the body as a straight line up to the crown, and that the crown would actually be the higher. But Cayce references the idea of the ancient staff and the Hindu ancient king cobra, that actually the path of life inside the temple of the body flows in the same shape as these two icons. You may recall that Moses in the desert, before he is actually instructed how to build the temple, meets 7 virgins around a deep well. Not exactly a normal occurrence in the desert. These 7 virgins may well be a metaphor of the 7 spiritual centers in the physical body, which Cayce associates with the 7 endocrine glands. The deep well could be the deep well of consciousness. After meeting them, he marries the highest one, the oldest one, the 7th, and then he meets God in the desert. And the first thing God does is tell him to see the serpent on the desert floor, raise it up, and when he does, it becomes a powerful staff in his hand. Again, showing this concept of the life force being raised up to a higher level. And so Moses reaches down and grabs that serpent, and when he raises it up, it becomes a powerful staff. To understand this a little further, you have to be aware that in Genesis, not only Adam and Eve fell in the garden, but the serpent fell also. And that it was a symbol of our life force coming down to lower and lower consciousness, lower and lower vibrations, until it actually was like crawling on its belly on the ground in the earth and only seeking earthly things. So one of the first techniques to entering the temple within is just what God did with Moses, to raise the serpent energy, the life force, the kundalini power within yourself, raise it up to a higher level. And then it's easier to get into this communication with God directly when you have a higher vibration. So raising the serpent energy or the kundalini force in the body, following the shape of the staff, is the pathway of the life force. Even though you'll see some books that'll actually teach it straight up. In the Cayce teachings, the centers go like this. This would be the sexual centers of the body, the testes in the male and the ovaries in the female. This would be the cells of Leydig, which were named after the doctor that discovered them. This would be your endocrine glands, your adrenal glands, part of your endocrine system, the third center. And this would be your thymus, the heart center. Here's your thyroid in the throat. And then you would move up to the pineal gland in the center of the brain, and then over to the pituitary gland, the master gland of the body. Now again, you'll see some books that will actually reverse these numbers. This will be 6 and 7. But I'm following the older teachings and the Cayce approach that actually the pathway of the life force is the shape of the cobra and the shepherd's crook. And that actually the energy comes up to the base of the brain, flows over to the center of the brain, and then on to the forehead. In the Psalms, you will actually see a teaching, a mystical teaching that says the silver cord must be loose and the golden bowl must be broken. This is referring to the life kundalini force in the body and to the crown area of the head. When our souls and spirits entered into the physical body, they descended in through the nervous system, and that's the silver cord, and pushed themselves completely into the nervous system of the body. And the more they grew and were socialized physically, the more we pushed through the nervous system until we externalized all consciousness. That's the silver cord that has to be loosed from such a profound physical focus. You have to loosen that and move back in and lighten up the material possession and the material projection and move back. The golden bowl is the top of the head that as a little child, when our soul entered through the crown, it was soft and open. And as we grew and became more physical and more materially conscious, it seals over. The mystical teaching of that golden bowl being broken again is to move through it again and rise up into the higher levels of consciousness. Cayce says the soul, our souls, are actually encased in the body, and that they're actually behind a closed door on the second spiritual center of the body. Unless someone starts to love more or become creative or have higher thoughts and higher ideals than just self-gratification and physical life ideas and desires. If they do, the door opens. The soul starts to rise up more consciously, more present. You start to become more perceptive. Your senses become more alive because you're bringing the life force to the senses. And as the soul moves up, it hits another barrier at this level. This, however, Cayce said, is the open door. It is never closed. And one starts to move into what Cayce called the heavens. The upper three chakras are associated, or spiritual centers, are associated with heaven. The lower four with earth. So as one starts to make the movement through this upper open door area, one starts to move into higher consciousness. And that's what's meant by the golden bowl being broken. The silver cord being loose is so projected and enmeshed into material life and material perception only. That's why entering the temple is a strange process, because you're sort of shutting down what you perceive to be consciousness. But it's just outer consciousness. And you're moving deeper within, and you're loosening the connections in the body. Related to Moses' journey, these would be first crossing the barrier of the Red Sea. It seemed impossible for there to be anything beyond physical reality. And physical reality is that this can't be passed. And yet something beyond the physical occurs. So it does in meditation, in attunement, in seeking God, that makes this transition possible. And what appears to be a closed door opens for you, and you can move through it. Then you reach another barrier, the Jordan River, and that leads you into the Holy Land, the Promised Land. It is promised by God to meet us in the temple. And though it's difficult and there are barriers to cross and journeys to make through the desert here, that last barrier of the Jordan River will lead you into what God promised as the place where He would meet us. And so these barriers can be moved through. And it's very difficult because for most of us, when you close your eyes and shut down your system, you think you're turned off. You're off and there's nothing going on. You sit in the darkness of your consciousness. But the truth is there are levels of consciousness deeper, and if you learn to make the transitions, you can actually move into them. Let's look at consciousness for a minute and get a feeling for the levels of consciousness, because not surprisingly, they're also divided into three parts. Basically, if you look at this as a symbol of our projection into matter, and here we are into this physical body. Put a little smile on this guy, it's not all tough. Your first level of consciousness is what we're most familiar with, the conscious mind, the three-dimensional mind, in which we develop the personality. Now for Edgar Cayce, this part of us manifested mostly through the central nervous system. So you see, for the most part, as a woman is giving birth to a little child, the spirit and the soul is pushing its way into life and consciousness through the brain and the central nervous system and the five senses. And for the most part, it is a brand new life birth for that soul in consciousness. A new body is created. A new three-dimensional consciousness starts to develop to perceive what this dimension is like. And we socialize them, we teach them, we guide them into this dimension. And within that develops a personality. The personality is affected by the parents around it, the surroundings it experiences as a child, the socialization process. The body is affected by heredity. All of this is a new person coming to life and gradually developing. For the most part, you and I really think of this as me. And when you start to get into entering the temple within, you're going to have to pass that first barrier of me-ness. That this is all I know to be me. My mom thinks of this as me. I think of this as me. But you have to make that transition over that Red Sea barrier and make a motion beyond the physical realities that gets you into a deeper level. And this is, the next level is the subconscious mind, which Cayce says is working mostly through the autonomic nervous system, the deeper nervous system in our bodies. And in the subconscious is the soul. And this would be, instead of the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. With these ideas in mind, it's very helpful because you can get into attunement a lot easier if you realize that by shutting down the outer self, turning off the senses, loosening the silver cord of the central nervous system, and opening the bowl of the central nervous system's earth brain to a higher consciousness, and sort of letting go of that, you will actually move through this barrier and into the deeper nervous system. The autonomic system that's running everything automatically within you has much more sophistication than the central system. Able to keep my breath going automatically, my heart beating automatically, without me trying to figure out how to do that. You also get into a deeper part of your being, a part that develops just like the personality does, but this one's been developing in the heavens for a long period since God created it. The soul, your soul and mine. And as we move through the autonomic system, you realize that all 7 of the endocrine glands are working in the autonomic system and are affected by the autonomic system. So now you're moving into the spiritual centers of the body. This transition in meditation is very noticeable. Cayce says one of the key indicators that you've moved into it is you'll feel a shift in your breathing and a deep sort of movement into like sleep or rest. You might even have rapid eye movement as you move into that deeper self. You have crossed the first barrier. As you move to the higher part of yourself, here's the first, the second, whoops, and now we'll move up into the third. Cayce and Hinduism call it the superconscious level. And the individual at this level, the ancient Egyptians called the godling. Or we could call it the little g God part of ourself. That part in Genesis tells us that we were made in the image of God. At this point, we were. At that point. Eventually, in the second chapter of Genesis, we are made out of the flesh, the clay of the earth, and the breath of life is breathed into us. This is the physical outer self. But the inner self was made in the image of God. And this is the godling part of ourselves. This is getting beyond the physical body, but it is like the essence of the nervous system. If you don't think of it as the nerves themselves, but the essence of the nervous system in the body, Cayce says, you're getting close to this. Kind of like electrical energy itself, bioelectrical. Now you're moving up into the part of your body that deals more with this, and you're getting very far away from the 5 senses and the material aspect of your body. This organism truly is an amazing temple for having direct experience with God, just as the ancient temple was. You're making these transitions, and eventually you put your hands on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. You're having a direct experience with God. As you get yourself to this level, as you raise the serpent of life, it becomes a powerful staff that leads you to this level. Eventually, the little finite self is connecting with the infinite God. The little individual is with the universal. The outer self is with the deep inner self, and it's gone one with its creator again. This is the passage that we're talking about. And this wonderful vehicle we're in is perfectly designed for us to realize this. It is difficult. The outer self has to make many transitions in order to get there, but it's not impossible. And there are some very key steps that we're going to talk about today that will show you exactly how to make this passage. And eventually what happens is that the great universal consciousness, God's mind, let me see here, we'll get this right, universal consciousness, the mind of God, and the Great Spirit start to manifest more in and with us in our life. And we start to reintegrate ourselves, and we're not so segmented and isolated into this projected self, but all aspects of ourselves start to come. And the Great Spirit comes with us. Then life is much more abundant, much richer, much more meaningful. And we start to really integrate the whole of our being. So now in the next section here, we'll spend some time on the technique of how to do this. Now that we understand some of the concepts behind the idea of the temple and the temple within us, let's look at specific techniques for moving through the temple of the body and attuning to God and gaining a sense of God consciousness with us. As I described earlier, we have two nervous systems we're working with in the physical body. So one of our techniques is to move from the central nervous system to the deeper nervous system. And throughout all of history, all the great seekers and the schools that have taught these techniques have chosen the breath as the number one technique for moving from your outer senses, your outer nervous system, to your deeper one. Mainly because the breath is controlled by the autonomic system. And if we engage it and willfully take hold of it, the autonomic system and the subconscious become alerted. Suddenly we've grabbed a hold of something that's normally done automatically. And we use the breath. And it helps us move deeper into this area. It also helps us to raise the energy of the body with certain breathing techniques. If you combine this with the power of the subconscious mind to imagine things happening, you can start to affect the body to fit the imagination. Edgar Cayce often recommended for deeper meditation to use the imaginative forces, to see yourself and feel yourself and know yourself actually realizing the movement within and the attuning to the higher self. Also, because we have these three chambers of the body, we can actually use sound to help stimulate the physical endocrine glands themselves. Sound is a vibration, and by using certain incantations, you can stimulate the centers inside your body. In fact, the two endocrine glands in your head are actually suspended glands, and sound can actually vibrate them, move them like a little massage. So we'll discuss some incantations that work well with this. A couple of things that Cayce recommended is always, in the beginning, when you're first starting out with this, try to pick the same time every day and the same place. It helps the subconscious, which is seeing through the same eyes we are, that as you approach that location in your house or wherever you are, it senses, here we go into this practice again, into this effort again, and things start to automatically adjust in the body, chemically, electronically, and consciously, to begin the process. Same time, same location. The deeper part of our being is very time sensitive. It actually can feel time and know where it is. Have you ever not needed your alarm clock to wake up? You just knew that was the time, or ever sensed the exact time? That's the deeper self that does that. So a similar time and a similar location each day is very helpful to this technique. Also, before you actually get into these metaphysical techniques I'm going to teach you, Edgar Cayce had a series of physical techniques that would help the body. The most famous of all is his head and neck exercise. It's a very simple technique, but it does loosen up the body and allow the spinal column and the spinal fluids and the electrical patterns to flow better from the body up to the brain. The technique goes basically like this. You're going to move the head 3 times forward, stretching like this, but feel the stretch down the back of your body as you do it. And then lifting the head up so you don't come down on the cervicals. Lift up a little bit. You go back 3 times and feel the stretch down the front of your body. And then you do 3 times to the right, 3 times to the left. Of course, when I'm going to the right, I feel the stretch on the left side of the body as I do that. And the opposite on the other side as I do this. After you've done those stretches, he then wants you to rotate the head 3 times in one direction and then reverse it 3 times in the other direction. Another stretch technique that he does that's so good is he asks you to reach for the ceiling And as you reach, roll up on the balls of your toes and then stretch over, and like the cat or the feline community does, do that alternating stretch that they do when they're ripping your couch up or your carpet, stretching in an alternating pattern like this, and loosen up the whole spinal column. These stretching techniques help get the body comfortable and ready to sit in the position for a while, but they also get the fluids and the electrical patterns flowing well. Now, you can get in a comfortable sitting position, or you can use an Eastern asana, a yoga position if you'd like, or you can even lie down. When you get into this position, the first thing we're going to do is start to shut down the central nervous system. Normally, I'll take the somatic nervous system and the muscle and skeletal structure, and I will just simply start to shut them down. I'll relax the body. I will stop moving. As soon as I get comfortable, I'll start moving. And I will shut off impulses to the skeletal muscle structure of the body. And now I'll start to subdue the senses. I'll start to stop looking, stop hearing, and move deeper within myself, shutting down the external senses. Now I'll start to engage the autonomic system, and I'll use the breath to do this. There are two breathing techniques that are very good. The first is a polarity breath, or an alternating nostril breath that Cayce taught. In this case, you'll begin with 3 inhalations through your right nostril, deep and full, filling your lungs, and feel, Cayce says, strength while you're doing it. You'll exhale through the mouth. So here's how it would go. Notice that I'm doing a complete inhalation and a complete exhalation. I am pausing once the lungs are full, and I'm feeling strength. And when I exhale, I will pause too. There are 3 levels to your lung: the diaphragm area, the chest, and the upper shoulders. And if you watch, you'll see me fill all 3 levels. Again, the breathing is not just the breath. I'm actually moving to the deeper nervous system by taking hold of its chief concern, my breath. My subconscious is becoming more alerted. It's closer to the surface. I'm moving deeper into the system by grabbing hold of this breath. And I'll do it again. Now we'll use the left nostril. In this case, Cayce doesn't want us to feel strength as much as he wants us to feel the movement in the upper part of the body as we inhale and feel ourselves opening to the spiritual influences. And exhale through the right nostril, not through the mouth. It's a much more gentle feeling than the first one, which has power and strength to it. I'm feeling myself open more to the deeper spiritual influences. During that second phase, my consciousness is much more up here. During the first breath technique, it's more in the torso with the power and the strength feeling. Now this next breath technique is a circulation of the breath, which tries to draw the energy of the body upward. It's the lifting of the serpent idea in the desert. Raise the serpent up and it becomes a powerful staff. And it follows the red line there of the Kundalini pathway. So what's going to happen is with every inhalation, I'm going to imagine, use my imaginative forces, and I'm going to feel as I inhale an ascending of the energy from the lower parts of my body, the lower centers, up through the neck, into the bottom of the brain, over to the center, and then onto the forehead, and I will hold the breath there. I'll feel myself attuning to God and the spiritual forces. Then I will exhale and bathe the body in this raised energy. I'll hold the exhale a little bit in the peace and silence, and I will inhale again. So it goes something like this. While I'm doing that, I'm actually using my mind's eye to visualize the energy rising up the spine, over to the base of the brain, to the center of the brain, and then onto the forehead. And when I hold there, I'm actually trying to visualize myself in the great Holy of Holies, receiving and attuning to the Holy Spirit, the Great Spirit, the presence of God. You can do 3 or 7 of those, however many you want to. And you can even do them more gently as you go along. For example, you can watch your breath in the next series, and every time you inhale, feel an ascending. Every time you exhale, feel a bathing and a rejuvenating of the body. Normally at this point, we would shift from the breath technique, which has already got me feeling deeper within myself, to an incantation, or what is often called a chant, that will actually vibrate, and as the sounds change, will have an ascending reality to it, or ascending sense. There are several incantations, some dating way back to ancient Egypt, and the Sanskrit Hindu teachings of long ago. One that Edgar Cayce taught that's very popular is the Om. And basically the sound is R in the lower parts, E, and you start to rise up here, Om, and you're up in this area, and then the sound, that final M sound, brings you right to the forehead. And the idea is to make the sound as an inner sounding, not a singing. Om, that's projecting it out. I actually want to project the vibration of the vocal cords in the chambers of the body, in the 3 chambers of the temple, the abdominal cavity, pulmonary cavity, and the cranial cavities. I'm trying to reverberate them in there and stimulate the inner parts of my body, the endocrine glands, and activate a change towards deeper consciousness. So it would go something like this. Notice it's monotone. It usually has vibration with it. You're trying to vibrate. Monotone, vibration, and it's an inner visualization of ascending while you're doing it and visualizing where you are with that sound. So I'll do 2 more of these. The silence after the sound is very important. It's that transition when everything's trying to make adjustments to go deeper, to cross the barriers, to reach into the new levels of consciousness. Another great incantation is the classic Om chant. In this incantation, you're basically trying to call all the cells of the body and their energy and consciousness and turn them around toward the temple, toward the inner parts of the temple. According to Edgar Cayce, every cell of the body has consciousness, and you can raise it or lower it. And the effort here is to raise the energy of every cell of the body and its consciousness, and to refocus that consciousness toward the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies. The Om chant can be done in several ways, and I'll show you a few techniques, and I'll just go ahead and do a series of 3 using some of the techniques. And what I'm actually doing when I do that sound is I'm visualizing all the cells of my body on the Om calling sort of sound. And then the as that focal point, like going through the crystal, focusing it all through that crystal, just like we do with a laser. And I'm bringing that right to this point, where all the is focusing that energy on one point. And I get very singular in focus and in consciousness right at this point, with a sense of making direct contact with God, just like I had put my hands on the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. And I abide at that point, and the whole body starts to turn in that direction. Now the next stage of meditation, and if I could get up to show you this, is going to be a shift from such physical activity to more of a spiritual and consciousness. I'm going to use somewhat like a mantra, an affirmation, a guiding concept of thought to move my mind. Now that my body is sort of stilled and attuned, I'm going to start to move the mind towards the higher concepts, the higher spirit, the higher nature of awareness by mantras or affirmations or little phrases. And just for our practice today, there are many, many of these we could use. I'm going to take a little paraphrase from Psalm 46 and use "Be still and know God." And I'm going to keep the breath going in the rhythm of this as I do it. And so as I say, "Be still," I'm going to take a full breath and feel, see, and know with all my imaginative forces to bear stillness. And then on the phrase, "and know God," I'm going to move with all that that concept means, no matter whether I'm Islamic, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, God. All that force bringing me up to that. And know God, taking a breath and feeling God, and letting my mind now move into that direct attunement with the Creator. And then at some point, instead of being so yang in this directive reach toward God, I am going to become very yin at that point and be receptive to receiving the Great Spirit and God consciousness. And go into what might be like a waiting, a quiet, receptive, expectant waiting, and feel God's presence and become very feminine, very yin, very receptive to that. So I'm yang and reaching and aggressive on seeking it, and know God. And I use all my forces to bring me up to that. And then as I get close to it, I start to drop off of the mantra. I don't keep repeating it. It's not the mantra that's doing it. As I sense it occurring, the reality starting to take hold, I yield to that and become very receptive. And hold in that stillness and that quiet and just start to become receptive. So the next sequence will be, after having the body's vibrations raised, feeling myself attuned physically, I start to move the mind. Now the mind's already moving pretty good. And inside I'll be using the phrase, and you can use it for a while outside, "Be still. I will breathe fully and feel stillness, see it, know it in my being." And I'll start to still the mind completely. The outer mind will become very still. Be still. And know God. And there'll be a sense of reaching for that. And the breath will start to take into the rhythm of the know God. And the imaginative forces will come, and I will try to see it, feel it, and know it's happening. It is not unusual, and many people studying with Edgar Cayce had these feelings also. It is not unusual to find yourself moving a little bit. Sometimes the body will rock back and forth, sometimes left and right, sometimes there'll be a rotation motion. It's not unusual for the head to feel drawn back a little bit, or for a coolness to come across the forehead. These are very normal physical sensations as you reach into the spirit. Be still. And know God. And once that starts to occur, you don't keep repeating the words. You go with the reality, the actual experience. Move into the presence of God. Move into the real experience. And abide there in a receptive mode. Now, after you've been in this silence for 20 minutes or 40 minutes or perhaps an hour, your body's going to be quite different. And there's a transition that you need to make as you come back out. You need to reintegrate the whole of the body and not leave all of the consciousness and the energy in the upper portions of the body. Or you'll start to have sensations of headaches or fullness or discomfort up here. So you need to visually feel yourself rebalancing the body, equalizing the energy and the consciousness throughout the body, and integrating the deeper nervous system with the outer nervous system, reconnecting the silver cord, reconnecting with the sensory parts of your body. So you can use the breath to draw the energy and equalize it, use the imaginative forces to visually feel and see and know yourself equally distributing this energy back and not leaving the supercharged or the raised energy in the upper portions of your body. So take some time to rebalance and reintegrate the whole of the system, all portions of the body getting an equal sense of this energy, this new attunement. You don't want to come right back to physical vibration instantly. You want to bring the essence of the meditation with you and imbue the body with the spirit and the higher vibration. You just don't want to leave it all concentrated in the upper parts of your body. You want it equally distributed. Cayce even recommended that you visualize yourself giving some of this energy to your organs, giving them the rejuvenative energy, stimulating the inner organs of the body with this revitalized attunement. And then as I feel my body rebalancing and equalizing, I'm ready to function again in this dimension. An important teaching in the Cayce material is that attunement, even attunement to God, is of no value to us if we don't live it in the outer life. If we don't apply what we're feeling and learning by the deep attunement in the outer life. You just can't get up from these deep spiritual attunements and go kick the dog and beat the kids and have a bad attitude all day long. You have got to have your emotions and your attitudes and your approach to outer life and to other people reflect this inner attunement, this inner experience that you're having. It doesn't mean that we become monks and soft-spoken, gentle people, but that there has to be some reflection of what you're seeking manifesting in your outer life. So keep that in mind. Look at your outer meditation all day. Look at the words you're speaking, the attitudes, the thoughts you're thinking about other people. Would you be doing those if you were fully consciously present, sensing the presence of God? Would those thoughts, those words, those emotions, if they would be, then you're integrating the inner self with the outer self very well. And there's a harmony developing. If not, there's a disharmony. And the outer doesn't reflect what you're seeking within. So remember to apply yourself in the outer life and to live what you are seeking as you enter the temple within. If you work on these techniques and these concepts regularly, you will find the better self, the higher self, and you'll find it in a very natural way in the outer life. It's not supernatural to the spirit, to the soul. That is very natural. To the outer self, life is very limited and focused, but when it starts to integrate the other parts of our being and the whole of the Spirit of God into life, everything starts to become renewed, revitalized, and has great purpose to it. So apply yourself to these techniques. Allow time. You have to budget some time for them in your life, but it's well worth the time. And you'll be able to really fully realize the benefits of entering the temple within.